Hello and welcome to Maine Law Matters. I'm Lee Softly. I'm currently serving as the president and dean of the University of Maine School of Law. I will be your host in a series of monthly interviews with people who have had a positive effect on Maine law, the state's only law school, on the Maine legal community, and on Maine and our country. And our interviewee today is none other than Ellsworth T. Rundlett III. Known to most of us as Derry, Ellsworth has led an extraordinary life. As an actor, an athlete, a rock and roll historian, an author, and a lawyer who has changed lives. Derry, you and I have known each other primarily in the context of your legal career, where you were a litigator, I was a judge. But today, I hope we can set all of that aside. You be Derry, and I'll be Lee.
Well,
does that work for you?
I always appreciate being able to call you Lee. After calling you Your Honor for so long.
I'm happy to have a first name again.
Yeah,
it's really a wonderful thing. So let me just be candid with you that my goal today is to trace the threads of many of your careers and adventures from your youth all the way to the point where you actually became the dream weaver. All of those dreams came true. So, welcome, Derry. Let's begin at the beginning.
Okay.
Tell us where you grew up and give us a little sense of what your childhood was like.
Well, I was born in Portland at the Maine Medical Center in 1946. And my family lived for a number of years at Watchuk Lake in Standish. We lived in a home that was once occupied by a man by the name of Vasco da Gama number 7, I think. The original, a relative of the original Vasco da Gama. And then we moved to Portland when I was 10 years old and lived in what is now called the Gothic House on the other end of Spring Street. And I remember being in law school one day watching the house go by because they had to move it. When the Holiday Inn bought that spot, they had to pay to have the house moved, the Gothic House. And I lived there until we moved into a hotel, the Falmouth Hotel, which was a very strange existence for me. I was 10 years old. Here I am. I'm living in a hotel.
Your dad was the hotel manager.
He was the hotel manager. That's correct.
Did you ever have any dignitaries come through the hotel?
We did. One day, Richard Nixon came to have lunch there. I'm not sure why they chose the Falmouth Hotel, but it was a well-known hotel. And I went home for lunch. I was in the 5th grade, and I showed up at the front door. I started walking in. The Secret Service says, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm going to go in this hotel." "You're a kid. Get out of here." I said, "I live here." "No, you don't live here." So I snuck around back and found the back door to the kitchen, went through the kitchen and up the elevator and had lunch. But I never got to meet Richard Nixon.
It does cause a little bit of concern about the security if you could get in the back door.
Yeah, when they saw me going out, they looked at me and I just waved and walked out the door. And I thank goodness I didn't get arrested.
So did you stay in that hotel for a long period of time? No, my
father passed away the night before we were vacating that hotel. The hotel got shut down because they had to put all new fire escapes on it, and so the hotel got sold. And my father died the night before we moved out of a major heart attack at age 46.
And he was a very young man.
Yeah, 46, and that changed my life. I will tell you, that was the most difficult year of my entire life. I was in the 7th grade. And we moved to another hotel called the Graymore at the time. It was right in the center, right in Monument Square, right there. It's where the public market was a number of years ago. And that was a difficult time. That was not quite the hotel that my father had managed. This was a rather, they had strip shows there and things of that nature. So it was a different place for a kid to be living.
And you were how old?
I was 12 years old at the time, yeah. And that was a very difficult year for me. I spent a lot of time, my mother had a breakdown because of the death of her husband. And so I was alone a lot.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
Well, I had 3 brothers and a sister. And my sister, God bless her, she came down from the University of Maine and persuaded us to go to Orono, to move to Orono. And that's where I went to high school, Orono High School. I graduated in '64.
Graduated in 64. So let's go back just a little bit. You were born in 46.
Yeah.
So you were the first year of the boomer generation, which is my generation as well. But you were right on the cusp.
Right on the cusp, that's right. I've been watching a lot of world history and all about the World War II and Hitler and so on and so forth. And now I'm understanding how that all happened, how that baby boomer generation happened.
And you and I hear a lot, okay, boomer.
Yeah.
We're not quite as up to snuff on some of the technology, but we're getting there.
I have to say, for a while, we were the controlling generation because there were so many of us, and now we are no longer that.
We're fading away.
We're fading away.
All right, so let me take you back a little bit. I'm dying to know how Ellsworth became Derry as a nickname.
I once asked my parents how that happened, and I recall my mother saying that because I was the last member of the family, the last one born, that I was named after the French word derrière, which we also know, and that's the story they told me. I didn't like it very much, but that's what I was told.
So you have been Derry for a very long time.
I've been Derry for a very long time, and I didn't realize that when I went to Ireland that the town of Derry was very important in the peace talks.
So you're very special in Ireland.
Yeah, I was very special in Ireland. Yeah,
this is a very important point. Yeah. Where are you in birth order?
Well, I was the youngest of
the very last, and hence the derrière.
Yeah.
No children born after you.
No.
And are your siblings still in Maine?
All of my siblings have passed.
Derry, I'm so sorry.
Yes. My sister first, and my two brothers, and then in 2024, my oldest brother, who worked for NASA, by the way, and was involved in the moonshot.
What did he do?
Well, he worked for NASA. He went to MIT out of Rockland, Maine. A very bright man. And so he was involved when Armstrong went on the moon. And, when you see the 400 people sitting in the control room, he was one of them. And fascinating. And then one of the posters that I have in my house is a signed poster by Alan Bean, who was number 4 on the moon. And he was an artist, and he painted a picture of, and he gave it to my brother, and it says, "John, best wishes." So I was very proud of my brother John for working for NASA.
And he, I assume, was very proud of you, but we'll get to all of those things as we move. So you graduated from Orono High and went off to Bowdoin with a little bit of a challenge as you started at Bowdoin. Tell us about that.
Well, in October of my freshman year, I married my high school sweetheart. And we had a child born in May of my freshman year. But Bowdoin was going to kick me out because they had a rule that you could not live off campus. And so after I moved into that apartment, I got a letter from Bowdoin saying that I was being discharged from the campus. But I was very fortunate that I had a trust fund, a small trust fund, set up by my grandmother. And my trustee was the Canal Bank, now Key Bank. And my trust officer came up to Bowdoin, and we met not at the college, we met at the bank. And the dean came down, and my trust officer sat there and tried to convince him to let me stay. And the dean said, "No, we're sticking by the rule." And I will never forget that my trust officer said, "Listen, I went to Bowdoin, the manager went to Bowdoin, the president of the bank went to Bowdoin. We handle all of Bowdoin's money. Please don't send me back with bad news." And I thought that was a strange thing for him to say. And the next thing I saw was the dean grumbling. He goes, "Oh, well, all right, but he better shape up." And I remember thinking at the time, I want to be like that guy. I want to be a lawyer. That's when I decided I wanted to be a lawyer.
That's when you decided to be a lawyer.
His name was Dave Osgood, and I had the opportunity when I founded the Portland Players Hall of Fame to make him the first inductee to the Portland Players Hall of Fame because he was an incredible actor at Portland Players.
Did you begin acting at Bowdoin?
No, I began acting actually in the 6th grade. I got chosen for the lead in an operetta called The Town Meeting, and I was the moderator of that, and I had to get up and sing a solo song. And I remember there were 4 or 5 tough guys sitting in the front row. They had their sleeves rolled up, and they're looking at me. And when I walked out the door of the school, these 4 tough guys came up to me and said, "Hey, you." I said, "Yeah? Great job today." And so I became their friend, and so I was pretty well protected around that school.
Did you ever think of heading off to Hollywood?
I did, because the acting bug bit me in high school. I had one of the leads. We did Pygmalion, My Fair Lady. My acting career ended there until I got to become a lawyer, and then I had several lead roles at Portland Players.
And you set up the Portland Player organization piece.
I was president of Portland Players from 85 to 87, yeah.
So what kept you from moving on, going to New York, working in sitcoms? Because you are a walking sitcom.
My life is a sitcom. I often tell people, I swear I'm living in a sitcom. Well, what happened was, when I got out of Bowdoin, I would have been drafted. But I had a radio show. I was very fortunate. I was going to be drafted because that's when they stopped all law school deferments. We watched Louis Hershey on TV saying there will be no more law school deferments, only for the clergy and medical. And so I was going to be drafted, but I got a call one day when I was on the air. I had a radio show at Bowdoin, and I got a call saying there was a reserve unit open up in Auburn. And I went up there and I joined that reserve unit that day. They had 70 openings the day before I got there. They had 7 the day I got there, so I joined right off the bat. And so I had to go in the service for basic training in AIT for a half a year. And then when I came out, I worked for Channel 6 Television. But while I was at Channel 6 Television, I longed to go to law school. And very fortunately, I was accepted at several law schools, but chose Maine. Yeah.
So before we get to law school, you had a radio show.
I had a radio show at Bowdoin.
ETR.
Yeah.
Right?
The ETR show, yeah, hits of our decade, yeah.
And you had the 100 top
Oh
hits.
my goodness! You really
and
know
that will tie in later.
Thank
Your
you.
life has been so interesting. So you did the top hits of the time while you were there.
Yeah.
And,
Elvis and the Beatles and everybody else. Yeah.
And became quite a historian of what I think of as the burgeoning rock era.
Yes, well, absolutely. No question. The rock era began with Elvis and the Everly Brothers and Brenda Lee and Bobby Rydell, all of whom, except Elvis, I got to meet and become friends with.
You say that so casually. No, we want to go. I want to go right back there. We'll get to the Elvis outfit in a moment. But you became friends with Brenda Lee.
Yes, yes. I started going on these rock and roll cruises. I would call them malt shop cruises and flower power cruises, and these were all of the hit makers and rock and roll Hall of Famers from the 50s and 60s, all the people that really started rock and roll.
Right.
And the ship would be filled with 2,000 people, mostly my age. I met Brenda one afternoon, and I began a conversation with her, and I asked her, what's it like to know that your voice will be heard until the end of time? Because her song, Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree, is played every Christmas. And she said, what's your name? And when I gave her my name, they Googled me up, and she said, wrote her name and her address down and her phone number, and she said, are you by yourself on this ship? I said, yes, my wife doesn't want to come on this cruise. She said, well, why don't you spend the rest of your week with me and find out who I am? And we became very close friends.
Wow.
Yeah.
And she knew that you'd had the top 100 list.
Oh, yeah. Well, what happened was we sat beside each other watching the Herman's Hermits, Peter Noon, do his hits. And I knew every lick of every song.
In person on the cruise.
And Peter Noon's daughter was sitting to my right, and Brenda Lee on my left. And so Brenda and I were doing a duet up there, every song that came on. And that was, I'll tell you something, Lee. I went outside, I looked up at the moon, and I said, this has got to be a message from above. It was one of the greatest moments of my life to do a duet with Brenda Lee for a whole hour.
Wow. What prompted you to go on the cruise?
Well, my brother wrote to me and he said, Derry, these people on this cruise were all people you know. And on the first cruise, I met Bobby Rydell, and Rydell High School in Greece is named after Bobby Rydell, and the character of John Travolta was based on Bobby Rydell and Frankie Avalon and Fabian, the good-looking Italian guys that could sing and dance. He and I became very close friends because we had a conversation about being in the military. He was also in the reserves. And he said, guess what? I was a squad leader. And I said, you were a squad leader because you could sing Volare? And the first look on his face, I said, well, I was a squad leader too, Bobby, because they thought I sounded like John F. Kennedy. He said, you do sound like John F. Kennedy. And that became our friendship. And when he passed away, in 2022, I was one of only 100 people invited to his funeral.
Oh,
and I own the rights to a musical that he and I commissioned to have written about his life. Yes, he wrote a book called Teen Idol on the Rocks. And that book was, he and I commissioned a man to write a musical about that. And we were going to do it in Philadelphia, but he passed away in 2022, and that musical went down the tubes. So,
do you ever think about reviving it?
I have, Lee. I can't believe you asked me that, because every year that goes by, I say, I'm going to do that musical. I promised him I would get it. And my goal was to be able to sit in the front row with him on the opening night.
Oh, wow.
But we became friends over that musical.
What a lifetime you have. And we've really only gotten you into your 20s.
I know. That's true, yeah.
So you also became a big fan of Elvis Presley.
Yes. Oh, my God. In 1956, in that hotel, I recall distinctly, like it happened yesterday, watching him on the Ed Sullivan Show. And I remember also thinking, I want to be like that guy. And so I went to every Elvis movie. I saw him in his first movie, Love Me Tender. And then I saw all the other 32 movies that he did, where he basically plays himself in every movie.
Exactly. So how is it you came to have the Elvis suit?
So I started imitating him, and I was pretty good at it. And so when I got older, my wife bought me a $1,500 jumpsuit, just like the one he wore in Vegas, and a wig, and I began doing Elvis more and more. And the last performance I did was at Anthony's, where he had 3 Elvises, and I was one of them. And when I was at Bowdoin, I did Elvis, and we did a fake CNN opening. That here is Ellsworth, Elvis Rundlett, who graduated from Bowdoin, and now he's an Elvis impersonator in Vegas. And we did this whole thing. We had slot machines and everything. And when we showed that before I did Elvis, the 3 women went up to my wife and said, "Oh my God, your husband was an impersonator in Vegas?" And she goes, "That's a fake. That's a fake article." So I did I've done Elvis a lot of times, yeah, many times.
Have you done Elvis for the bar?
Oh yes, oh yeah. I've done Elvis for the bar. We did Terry Gammy and I did a show, a dog and pony show for the Bar Association summer meeting a number of years ago, and I did Neil Diamond, Elvis Presley, and Jerry Lee Lewis all on the same show. Yeah, so I also do a very good Jerry Lee Lewis. Yeah.
I have to tell you that this is not fair for me to take the story, but one of the first Bar Association meetings I went to as a judge, I was sitting at a table with a group of judges, and we were all being very proper and appropriate. And out onto the stage, you and Terry Garmy, with songs that were intended to have at the judiciary.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Appointed, one of them was appointed forever.
Oh, exactly. Appointed for life. And by the time you were done, there were a number of us who could not breathe. We were laughing so hard. You were amazing. All right. So.
Well, you were a lot of fun. You were a fun group to make fun of.
Well, we were an easy target, I think is how that went. So you graduate from Bowdoin. You start thinking about law school. You have all these other interests, including Elvis, a whole lot of really thinking seriously about creating a presentation with Bobby Rydell. What is it that gets you definitely into law school? You had the experience where you said, I think I want to be a lawyer. Why law school?
Well, I applied to law school when I was at Bowdoin. I applied to Virginia. Virginia was my first choice. And I was going to go to Virginia, but I had to go in the service. And then I was accepted at Virginia again and Georgetown, and I decided I wanted to try television first. I thought that my dream was to be on the air. And so I went to work for Channel 6 Television, but they made me an account executive. Yeah, and which was actually quite a feather in my cap that they hired me for that. They had 52 people interview for that job. I remember they interviewed me 4 times, and the last time I said, "Excuse me, I don't get any better." I mean, you're either going to hire me or you're not. And so, but while I was working in that job, I still longed to be a lawyer. So I reapplied to law school, and I got accepted at Maine, and decided that Maine was where I was going to go to law school.
What year did you start?
I started in '70 in the old law school down on High Street. And
was Dean Godfrey
Dean
still
Godfrey,
the dean?
my God Almighty, adored that man, and loved all my professors. My closest friends in life are basically the guys and the women I went to law school with. We only had 5 women in our class.
That's right. That changed over the years
Oh
ahead
boy,
of you.
that changed. I'm going to tell you, Lee, that I consider one of the greatest things that happened in Maine law was women becoming lawyers, and
Well,
instead
I would
of being,
have to agree with you on
yeah,
that
instead
point.
of being 5% or 2%, now 50% or better.
Or yes, you know that I'm fascinated with. I have a great sense of the power of place.
Yeah.
You started law school on High Street.
Right.
Moved to the Round Building.
Right, which we thought was the state-of-the-art building. We just were so proud to be there.
Did you like the building when you were there?
Well, I did, yeah. I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed the classes there, and enjoyed going there.
Every one of the major classrooms was internal, had no natural light in it.
I never thought of that, but
You were sort of in the dark.
we were sun-starved.
Yes, I think so. And there were not a lot of ladies' rooms, but that is for another conversation.
Yeah.
So you graduated with a class of 73.
That's correct, yeah.
The class of 73 has been extremely supportive of Maine law throughout your careers,
Yes.
all of
No,
you.
we're all very, very grateful to have gone to that law school.
When I became dean, I reached out to a number of the classes, and the class of 73 has stepped right up to name this room that we're in today for Dean Godfrey.
I was very, very, very proud of that.
And we are incredibly grateful. So talk to me a little bit about why you bonded so much and what keeps you all bonded to this law school.
I think that, first of all, almost all of us came from very good colleges. I remember sitting there, and Cappy Powers, my dear, dear friend, went to Brown, and then we had Dartmouth and Rod Rouser from Harvard, and then we had Peter Roy from Colby. And as we began to know each other, we all realized, my God Almighty, here we all are from these so-called Ivy League schools and whatever, and from the University of Maine and other schools too. And we just enjoyed each other's company so much. And so we spent a lot of time together. And we were very fortunate to have a professor like Harry Glass. And then we had a professor like Jerry Petrocelli, who, when he first did the first lecture, we thought he was one of the students. He got up there, he had a sweater on, and we go, what is he, the president of the Student Bar Association? And he goes, hi, I'm Jerry Petrocelli, I'm your contracts professor. and so we got a chance to really enjoy each other's company and enjoy that law school. And we loved the dean, and we loved our professors. And all of us, almost all of us, became fairly successful in law and whatever we chose. And judges, many judges, and so we've stayed close all these years.
That was very clear when your class started raising money.
Yeah.
Here, everybody was immediately in touch. Everybody wanted to be involved. It's a very impressive group, the class of 73. Not as impressive as the class of 80, but that's a whole.
Well, I'm going to go along with that.
Yeah. All right. So talk to us about impersonating Elvis at a Christmas event.
So what happened was they did a Christmas show at Lyric Theater, and they asked me to do Elvis. But they said, you can't lip sync. You've got to sing. And so I did Santa Bring My Baby Back to Me, and I did Here Comes Santa Claus with Elvis. And what I remember about it is that they had a chorus of about 8 or 9 10-year-old girls. And these girls were fascinated by my Elvis character. And they would come watch me get ready and put my belt on and get my jumpsuit ready. One night, I was just sitting in the backstage, and they said, hey, Elvis, what are you doing? I said, I'm becoming Elvis. And I was just sitting there. And so I went out, and that was one of my favorite performances. But when I got back in regular clothes, they didn't even want to speak to me, these kids. They only wanted they wanted me to sign their arms.
As Elvis?
As Elvis, and I signed out. And I know how to sign like Elvis. By the way, I have an Elvis Presley autograph. I paid $1,000 for it. It's on the back of a Polaroid picture. And he's holding a cigar, and he's signing the autograph. And what happened was some people from England took that picture, and they sent it to Graceland and said, would you please have Elvis sign this and send it back? And he did. He signed it and sent it back. So I have the envelope, and I purchased that. I'm very proud of that.
Wow.
And then I met I'm digressing a little bit, but I got invited by Wink Martindale, the TV host, and his wife to go down to Memphis, where his wife, who dated Elvis, was going to judge the Elvis contest. The biggest one in the world is in Memphis every year.
Was that Priscilla?
No, this was Sandy Martindale who invited me.
Oh.
But the night that I helped judge the contest, because they knew I was an Elvis impersonator, so I was in the deliberations. And when we left, I said, well, I have only one regret, that I didn't get to see Priscilla Presley. He said, we got a surprise for you. We went to the Peabody Hotel, and there, sitting in the cocktail lounge, was Priscilla Presley. And I made it my business to go sit next to her, and I sat next to her for almost 3 hours.
Wow.
And we became good friends in that 3 hours. And I remember telling her that I was an Elvis impersonator. She said, well, we don't use that word, Jerry. We use tribute artist.
Oh.
I said, well, I'm a tribute artist. She goes, well, you don't look much like Elvis. And I said, Priscilla, I move just like him. And a big smile. And the most interesting part of that conversation, Lee, was that Sandy Martindale had dated Elvis before he married Priscilla. She was in Viva Las Vegas with him. And Priscilla reached across my lap and took Sandy's hand and said, Sandy, I'm sorry that I stole your boyfriend. And I said, wait a second, this is the first time you've had this conversation?
So you had the two of them talking to each other about their history.
And when we got up, I asked if I could have a picture with her, and she said sure. And I left, and in the song, walking 10 feet off a Beale, that's how I felt. I couldn't sleep all night. I was calling people at 2 o'clock in the morning, telling them I just spent the evening with Priscilla Presley. A wonderful human being, very sweet person.
Yes?
Yeah.
We haven't even gotten into a conversation about the fact that you have interviewed hundreds of people.
Yes, yeah.
And so let me just take you there for a minute.
Okay.
How did you start that? Were you working with Bob Baldacci in the beginning?
No.
Or was it Ken?
It was Ken. And Ken and his wife came up with the idea of a TV show called Law on the Line. And we decided to do that show. We did it on what is now Channel 5. And oh my God, it was my dream come true. That was when that was about the year 2000, and I was just ecstatic with that show. And I remember having you on the show. It was a wonderful evening. We had dinner at the Cumberland Club, and I just realized this was really a lot of fun. And then Ken left, and Terry Gami was my next co-host, and then Steve Schwartz.
Oh,
and
that's
then,
right.
And then I changed the show to Have Passport Will Travel. That wasn't too successful. And then it became the Derry Rundlett Show. And then Rob joined me, and now it's the Rundlett and Baldacci Report. And that is skyrocketed the show, because we've had some very famous people on our show. We've had Gianni Russo, the star of The Godfather. He played Carlo. He's called the Hollywood Godfather. He has his own podcast, and his book out now is a bestseller called Mafia Secrets. And he got that job in the movie because of the Gambino family. And so he was one of our favorites. We had George Mitchell on. We've had Bill Cohen, Joe Kennedy. We had B.B. Buell, who was the subject of the movie Almost Famous. And she had relations with 8 of the biggest rock stars. I mean, and she made no bones about it. She was very close to Mick Jagger, Jack Nicholson, Elvis Costello, and her daughter is Liv Tyler. And she was a fascinating interview. So, and when it was done, I said, BB, I want you to get me Mick Jagger. And so my goal is to hopefully interview Mick Jagger sometime.
Talk to us a little bit about how you prepare for an interview with some of these amazing people.
Basically read up about them. Of course, people like George Mitchell and Bill Cohen, I knew them personally. And George Mitchell's a dear friend, and Bill Cohen was a dear friend of Rob, and George Mitchell was a relative of Rob. And Rob got to know these mobsters. We also had one of the men is John Alite. He's featured in Fear City, he's featured in Get Gaudy, he's featured in almost every mobster show on Netflix right now. He'd killed 22 people and served time in many prisons. And he drove up from New Jersey and did the interview, and it was fascinating for him to talk about his life in the mob. And I have to tell you something, this is one of my favorite interview stories. When the interview was over, I was taking off my microphone, and I turned on my video first on my phone. I said, "You know something, John? I don't think you're so tough." And this look came across his face, and then we started laughing. And I said, "I've always wanted to say that to a mafia guy." and I got a call a week later from his girlfriend, I think it was, and she said, "Would you please do a video for John's birthday?" And I said, "Well, I'm very honored to do that," and I did. John Baldacci once commented to me and Rob, "What's this fascination you guys have with the mobs? You're glorifying these guys." And I said, "John, they were already glorified many times ago with The Godfather and Casino and Goodfellas. So they were already glorified before we got there."
So while we're on this topic, do you have a favorite interview of all time?
I'm going to say F. Lee Bailey. We had F. Lee Bailey on our show 3 times, and the last interview that F. Lee Bailey ever did for television was on my show. He passed away 2 weeks later. He had just come out with a book on O.J.'s innocence. F. Lee Bailey put together what I thought was a fairly good, reasonable doubt case about whether or not O.J. had actually performed the murder. And every time I mention that to people, they go, "Oh, Derry, come on." I go, "Read the book. Don't ask me to paraphrase what F. Lee Bailey said. Read the book."
He was a longtime high-end litigator.
Yes.
Accustomed to controlling the room.
Oh, yeah.
Was he a good interviewee? Did he
yes.
respond well
Well, of course,
to you?
You didn't have to ask him too many questions. I mean, he could go on for 10 minutes. But very, very honest, very candid. And, it's funny, Lee, we mention him, the connection of moments in time is a big part of my life. That when I did my first criminal jury trial in Cumberland County Superior Court, I read his book, Bailey and Rothblatt, How to Try a Criminal Case, How to Do a Criminal Case. And I have to admit, if I hadn't read that book, I would have walked in that courtroom and not even known where to sit. And so it's very coincidental that I would read his book. But the person I tried to emulate more than anybody else in the courtroom was George Mitchell. I did a case against George Mitchell in federal court. And I remember thinking...
Wait, you litigated against George Mitchell?
Well, yeah, I was defending a perjury defendant. And George was, at that time, the U.S. attorney before he became federal judge. Now that I look back at it, I probably should have taken a plea offer. The good news is that she was found guilty. The jury was not out too long. I love telling this story. Judge Janu was the judge. The good news is she got probation. Peter DeTroy was one of my witnesses, and the defense was that she was under duress when she testified before the grand jury. A bunch of guys broke into the Coast Guard base and stole some marijuana, and she was called to testify before the grand jury, and she perjured herself. And so I came up with that defense, and my favorite story of all the trials I've ever had, George came up to me just before the closing arguments, and he said, "Listen, I've got these 8 photos that I want to put in. They were little Polaroids. Do you have any objection to them?" I said, "Well, they were actual photos, right?" And they were just my client standing around with a bunch of people in front of those marijuana bales. And I said, yeah, go ahead. And when George came in the courtroom, those videos, those pictures were 14 by 20, about this big. Eh? And he got up, and as I began, I did my close, but she's under duress. She was afraid of this motorcycle guy, and so on and so forth. And George gets up and goes, "Does she look like she's under duress in this picture? Does she look like she's..." And I sat there. He did that like 8 times, and And the jury came back guilty. But he was, I remember thinking to myself, I like the way this guy tries a case. And so when I had him on my interview, I said to one judge once, I said, Jerry, are you trying to emulate George Mitchell? I said, yeah. He said, well, you got a long way to go.
So let's talk about your legal career.
Thank you.
When I saw you litigating, you were primarily at that point doing divorces.
Divorces and personal injury, yeah. But
And,
I did a lot of
personal
divorces,
injury by then.
Yeah.
And you had what was at the time a unique approach to divorcing parties. Talk about that a little.
Well, along with women becoming lawyers and judges in Maine, I consider one of the greatest changes in Maine law was mediation. And when we first started doing divorces, there's no mediation. You either resolved your case between the lawyers or you went in and tried cases in district court all the time. And so you would try a lot of divorce cases. But when mediation came along, I realized this is a chance for the parties to get together and not go to court and start calling each other names and hating each other. Because by the way, I noticed that when these parties went to court, there was venom coming out of their eyes. And I thought, this is not good for the kids. It's not good for the children to have two parents who loathe and detest each other. So I liked the mediation process, and that's how I approached it. But I also learned from having a partner who does nothing but divorce that many clients were not that satisfied because they would say to me later, I wish I hadn't settled. I wish I'd gone to court. And because a lot of divorce people, they apparently need that battle in the courtroom, and although I don't think it does, and then they become, you see them 3 or 4 years later and they're best friends. Oh my God, I'm best friends with my husband.
They need an opportunity to vent.
I guess that's what that's
and there
all
is
about.
a process for that doesn't require them to do it in a courtroom in front of a whole lot of people.
And I'll tell you a story that one day my law partner asked me to go down and do a case for him in district court. It was a motion hearing, and I remember going down there, and the judge said, "Are you folks willing to go to mediation?" Of course, I raised my hand, sure. And we went, and we spent an hour or so, and we mediated that issue, whatever it was, visitation, whatever it was. And when I got back to the office, my partner said, "You know, my client's not happy." Why? He says, because she didn't want to mediate. She wanted to go to hearing. And I said, listen, if you're going to make me go down there and just play Johnny Cochran in the courtroom, I'm not going to do it. I want to have credibility every time I go before a judge. And if one day I'm representing the husband on this issue and I argue this point, and the next day I'm arguing the other point, I don't have any credibility. So one thing I enjoyed about personal injury, Lee, was that I really believed in my clients. If you're a lawyer and you believe in your client, no matter what kind of case it may be, but you believe in your client, that your chances of success before any court are greater than if you just go in there and you're going through the motions.
One of the most rewarding opportunities I had in my career was to work with juries.
Yes.
To work with 12 citizens, good and true.
Right.
Did you enjoy jury work?
Oh my God, yes. And I wrote an article for the Maine Law Journal, the newspaper, and it was pro-mediation. I remember some of my friends, the trial lawyers, were not happy with it. A couple in particular were remain nameless. In fact, one of them suggested I be impeached as president for writing such
They were not amused.
Wrote a letter to the Board of Governors saying you should impeach this guy for being so pro-mediation. But I remember saying in the article 2 things. I said, the clients who I resolved my cases with through mediation were far happier than the clients that I tried cases with, even when I won. Even when I won a decent verdict. We won, Terry Gammy and I won a $260,000 soft tissue case, and I never heard from my client ever again. But the clients that I went to mediation with were always very happy. They were shaking hands. They didn't have to go through cross-examination. They didn't have to be talked about in a mean way. They enjoyed the mediation process. And I would often reduce my attorney's fees so that they would be happier. And I said this in the article. However, we still have to have the trial by jury. You've still got to keep that because every now and then you've got to go to court. And you can't agree on liability, you can't agree on damages, it's going to be a jury that decides it. And we all know that the insurance companies can take a very hard stand. They're not big on emotional injuries or head injuries. If you can't see it, if you don't have a broken arm, it's just something you're complaining about. And so I found that juries were absolutely fantastic. I enjoyed them. It's an incredible, talk about theater. It is the courtroom is the ultimate theater. And that's why whenever I presided at mock trials, I would say, folks, there are more shows on TV than westerns, police, and law than any other subject, including medicine.
I'm going to go back to my experience with you and others. You were always very careful to be candid with the court.
Yeah.
Your ethics and collegiality were great mentorship issues for
Thank
me.
you for that.
I could say to young attorneys, watch this attorney. Do you think that civility, which is something we talk about all the time, is getting worse or better in Maine?
Well, I have to tell you, thanks to you folks, putting on mandatory CLE where there's no harassment, you're going to be civil, and you became the epitome of what civility was supposed to be. I think people realized when you went before the Supreme Court, whatever, and when you were in the Superior Court, I just remember that you insisted on it. You insisted on civility. I remember specifically one particular case where the lawyer and I, by God Almighty, we were at it. And before I went down to see you in chambers, Billy Chow said, do not go in there and start screaming and hollering and poking fun at the other attorney. And it was great advice because you came in and you said, what the heck am I reading here? And I remember saying to you, well, I got caught up in it and I apologize. And I looked at the other attorney and he was not quite so willing to apologize at the time. I remember he was going, well, and I remember thinking, yeah, that was good advice from Billy not to go in there and go, well, I'll tell you what I'm doing here. And you and the other judges. The other thing is that happened is that when I first started practicing, we had some judges. They were tyrants, with all due respect. They ran, Judge Roy Bean, a cowboy courtroom, and they would yell at the lawyer, yell at the defendants, yell at people, and I remember thinking, this isn't right. And then I'd go before Judge Janu and people like him, and I go, my God, this is how a courtroom is supposed to be run. And so we began to see, and the trial lawyers began to take action against those judges that were not quite as civil as they wanted us to be. And that changed, I think. So I think it's much better now than it was.
I am so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I am so glad. Let's move to a whole different issue in your life. Talk to us about your daughter.
Well, this is a primary issue for me because my daughter, when she was born, was my son. She was Ellsworth Rundlett the fourth, actually, and I have a grandson, Ellsworth the fifth. And what happened was she was a wonderful, wonderful son growing up. We became very close. In fact, I was only 19 years older than my child, and so as we traveled the country, as we spent time together, people used to say, you act more like brothers than you do father and son. I don't ever recall reprimanding my child. I don't ever recall, getting mad or angry or anything like that. We were best friends almost from the day.
So she was born when you were 19.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. And I remember cutting class just to come home and spend time with her. And but when she got older, we went to Disney World. I'll never forget this. We went to Disney World together, and we went down and staying at the Animal Kingdom. And at dinner, she said, "I need to tell you something. I think I want to become a woman." And I didn't know much about this issue. I'd read about it. And I said, "You're not joking, are you?" No, I'm not.
How old was she at the time?
She was close to 40. And this has happened right around 2001. Yeah.
Had she talked to you about it before,
No,
or was
no.
this the first?
Talked to nobody about it before. And I think I was probably the first person that she discussed it with. And I just remember, the thought in my mind. The thought in my mind was, well, I'm on board for this. And the first thing I said, well, you're going to counseling, right? Oh, yeah, I'm going to counseling. I said, well, as long as you're in counseling, yeah, let's, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And that began a very arduous process, very difficult process. She had 3 children at the time, twins and another son. So she had 2 sons and a daughter. And a lovely, lovely wife who took this very hard. She was from a very conservative family, very conservative. And so this was a shock to them. This was not like a kumbaya, Michael rowed the boat ashore. They really were adamant against this. And I had friends and family that were adamant against this. But I began reading about it, and the advice from all the experts was support your child. If your child is becoming gay, or they want to become transgender, or they want to change their religion, they don't want to be Catholic anymore, they want to be Jewish, let them do what they think that they have to do. Don't try to control your child. But unfortunately, we're seeing an anti-transgender movement going on in this country, as you know.
You supported Nicole through her transition process,
Yep.
which
And
was hard on her and her children. Is she still close to her children?
Yes, that's the good news. That's the very good news. And she's close to her ex-wife, too. They're friendly. She's married to a woman. That's the part that people can't seem to grasp. But she's married to a woman, a very, very wonderful daughter-in-law. And I performed their ceremony at Portland Headlight. And I remember quoting the Supreme Court, who had just come down with the affirmation of same-sex marriage, equality in marriage. And of course, I'm good friends with John Baldacci, and it was his governorship that promoted equality in marriage.
And how is she now?
So, oh my God, she is so successful. She's very successful. She's been, my wife passed away a year ago, and she helped me through that, and she helped me sell my house. She and her wife, and we're as close as now. In fact, closer than we've ever been. And we wrote a book on the subject, and that book is called Full Circle: A Father's Journey with a Transgender Child.
Very impressive work. Let me take you back to something you thought about at Bowdoin. People have referred to you as the Dreamweaver.
Dreamweaver.
Because so many of the things you thought about doing with your life, you have done.
Yes.
Will you talk to us a little bit about that, the dreams that you had, and where you are now?
Thank you for that, and thank you for reading the article. Bowdoin College called me a couple of years ago, and they said, we'd like to have you write an article. And I said, write an article about what? I said, about how your dreams came true. And I said, well, it's going to be rather egotistical looking. And they go, well, just write it. And I sent it up the way it was. And I talked about, as you're in college, you have these dreams. And a number of them was to have my own radio show, TV show. That happened. Become a successful lawyer, and to become friends with the rock and roll stars that I was playing on the radio. And one day I was going to a play at Bowdoin, and the phone rang, and it was Bob Miranda, who sang the song "See You in September," which is considered the #1 summer song of all time. And he was with a man by the name of Dennis Stefano of the Buckinghams. And he said, Deary, I'm sitting with Dennis, and we just want to call and say...
Kind of a drag.
Yeah, kind of a drag. Oh, my God, there you go. That was in my
song of my youth.
Oh, my God, you just... That makes my day that you remember that song. And I said, well, guess what? I said, I'm 100 yards from where I made you two guys the stars that you are today. And I could hear them both laughing at the same time. And the other dream I had was I always wanted to be an Olympic athlete. And at Bowdoin in high school, I was mediocre. I was captain of my team at high school, but I was mediocre. When I went to the Olympics in '96, I watched Michael Johnson run the 200 and the 400, and I said to my wife, I want to be like him, and I want to run the Olympics. She says, you can't do the Olympics. I said, I'll do the senior Olympics. And in my first national race, I took 6th in the country in the 400, and then I came back to Maine, and I was the state champion in both Maine and New Hampshire a number of times in the sprints.
You've had your own health challenges. We won't get into those, but
well, those were pretty heavy.
Pretty serious health challenges. And you are mature, as am I. I think you're more mature than I am.
Yeah.
For using those words.
Yeah.
And yet, recently you did some running.
Bowdoin College put on an alumni meet in December. And it's a fun story because I went up there expecting to run against older people. And when I got there, I saw all these Bates and Bowdoin students walking around in track uniforms. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "Well, we have a track meet today." I said, "What about the alumni meet?" They said, "You're running with us." And so I ran the 60 and the 200 in lane 7, and I looked to my left, and I got 3 Bowdoin guys age 20 and 3 Bates guys age 20. I'm 80. And 60 years ago, almost to the minute, I'd run against Bates in the old cage. And it was Lee, I got to tell you, we have surreal moments in our life. And I just remember standing there, and the gun went off. And, of course, I didn't beat any of them. But I finished without hurting myself. And
that is amazing.
Well, the Bowdoin coach ran up to me, and the first words out of her mouth was, "That was amazing." And the good news was I didn't fall and hurt myself. And so that was a very strange moment. Thank you for bringing it up.
Talk about full circle.
Oh, yeah, that was absolutely a full circle moment. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, so it has been absolutely wonderful to interview you today. You are the quintessential interviewer in the state of Maine right now. What do you wish I had asked you?
I got to tell you something. I can't think of anything. I wondered what you'd be asking, where we'd go, and I've been able to say everything I wanted to say. I've just enjoyed this so much. We always wonder, we go through life always wondering what kind of impression are we making? And because I'm a Capricorn, the day I was born, January 12th, has been probably one of the most narcissistic signs on the astrological chart. But the one thing that you do that I've always wanted to do, I've always wanted to make people like me and respect me. And I've just enjoyed so much because you wonder, did I make a difference to anybody? And for you to have read about me, it's probably, this will be one of the greatest moments of my life, just sitting here for an hour.
Derry, you have impressed so many people, so many years. I do hope you understand that there are many young attorneys who have watched you and patterned themselves on you as you patterned yourself on other older lawyers. You have made a huge difference.
Well, I appreciate that. I was one of my favorite things was doing the Maine College of Advocacy for the Maine trial lawyers. And I taught at that course for many years with the greatest lawyers in Maine. I got the Legend Award in 2017, which is the same award that Ralph Lancaster got. And I still can't believe that my name would even be mentioned in the same sentence as Ralph Lancaster. And my friend Terry Gami and the good lawyers that I've had a chance to practice with, I've been very, very fortunate. I got to tell you something. If I'd gone to Virginia Law School, I probably would not have ended up in Maine. I probably would have ended up in Washington somewhere, some big law firm. And I can't believe how the dear Lord sent me down this path to have gone to Maine Law School.
The Maine legal community is one of the best in the country.
It is.
And you are a great example of
thank you
this
for
Maine
that.
legal community.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.